All righty. Well, welcome everyone to our fourth Saturday of the month for our Honolulu Nonprofit User Group. And today we are so excited and lucky to have Evan Ponter, who is kind of like a rock star in the Salesforce world. So I'm super excited that, he decided to come out, join our little Honolulu group over here. And Evan, as far as I can tell, has really cracked the code for custom report types. And so I've actually watched one of his videos and tried it myself. And I thought, geez, I've got to reach out to Evan and have him come and teach us a little bit more about this. So Evan, welcome. And I would love to get started with a little backstory on like, how did you get to Salesforce? What was your career journey? And how did you even get into this whole custom report type thing and come up with the deluxe idea? Yeah, tell us, give us a
Sure.
scoop on that.
Okay. Yeah. And while I'm doing that, if you could give me rights to share my screen, that'll help when
Oh,
we transition
sorry.
to that part.
Yes. Yes.
So my
Sorry.
story started back in 2012. I graduated from college and started working at a nonprofit that was using Salesforce. And they were small enough that they allowed everybody to have admin access, which is a terrible idea. But lucky for me that I had a place where I could experiment and start to learn more about Salesforce. That's how I first started getting into it. Fast forward a few years, I had a full-time admin job at a much larger for-profit company. I was one of two admins, and from day one, people kept coming up to me saying, I need to run this report. How do I get this data out of Salesforce? We're putting all this stuff in. You're the new admin. Can you help me solve this problem? So I went on a deep dive to really figure out how can I help these people? They're putting tons and tons of data, tons of automation, tons of resource behind getting their Salesforce implementation set up, but everybody has this common complaint of they're not able to run reports to get the data back out. So I really wanted to figure out, is there an easier way to do reporting in Salesforce? A lot of the documentation at the time sort of taught a certain methodology, and you'll see throughout this presentation that I sort of flip that upside down on its head and come at it from a whole different angle. Through the deep dive I did at that organization, this presentation was born, and I've been giving this talk at Dream events and Dreamforce and sort of any Salesforce event all around the world ever since 2016, 2017 timeframe. I've iterated, I've kept up with the latest releases and slowly added other best practices and other things that I've been doing in my career since that time that really have helped me simplify the reporting process. These days, I'm an independent consultant. I support a handful of clients in the for-profit and nonprofit worlds. I've been doing that full time since April of 2020, so it was very much something that I had the opportunity to take on full time during the pandemic, and I've been doing that ever since.
Oh, awesome. Well, so it's so interesting to hear everybody's career trajectory with Salesforce and how they started. Nonprofits is my passion as well. So now I think I gave you a sharing screen. Can you
Yeah,
share now?
looks like it's working.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so you're seeing my screen over here,
Yes, we are.
and
Reporting like never before.
okay, and now you're seeing Salesforce, or is it still the
Uh
same?
just your cover slide.
Oh, it's still the cover slide. Hold on, let me switch that. A little different. I want to do no. Why is it not giving me that option? Um, okay. So I just flip back and forth a lot. Let me see if there's something I need to do to get that to work. Do you have any other options for giving me like the ability to
Should I just make you the host?
I don't know if you'll have to do that. Let's see.
Because co-host should give you the capability of sharing your screen.
Okay. Yeah, it's letting me share, but only one application, not the whole window.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, then let me just make you the host then. Let's see.
Okay.
So let me try that. Okay, try it now.
It's still the same. We can get through it. I will have to keep switching back and forth. That's okay. Advanced does not give me another option. I've never seen it do this before.
Yeah. Let me see. Oh no. Okay. Hmm. I wonder if they did some kind of weird update.
Oh no. Oh, it's a different. No, that's really weird. Okay, we will figure it out as we go along here.
Sorry about that.
It's okay. I don't think it's your fault. It's something Zoom is doing. Let's start with the slides, and I'll try to keep my toggling back and forth to a minimum. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for being here today. My name's Evan Ponter. As I touched on a little bit earlier, I have my contact information here. I can also give that to you at the end. We have a small group, so feel free to come off mute, ask a question. I also have the chat window open, so if you want to put a question or comment there, I will keep an eye on that and hopefully be able to answer throughout the session here today. We are talking all about reporting today and how do we get data back out of Salesforce once we spend all this time putting it in. And I wanted to highlight some of the common frustrations people typically have with reports and why this session was even necessary in the first place. So the first common frustration I typically hear from people is they want to include fields from other objects in the report builder. They might have been using either standard report types or built their own custom report types or have an installed package that has a custom report type. And they've been able to reference fields from a couple different objects. But people always want more. How do we get more fields into the report builder from all of the other objects that we've set up in our data architecture hierarchy? The second frustration people have is, how do I eliminate duplicate results? So you'll be looking at a report, you'll see a bunch of results, but sometimes across multiple rows, you'll see the same value. And a lot of times when people run into this problem in Salesforce reporting, they'll get their results sort of close enough. They will export, go into Excel, uh, run that eliminate duplicates function, and sort of do some manual manipulation. Now that's fine if you have to do it one time, but if that's a report you need regularly, it can be very tedious to go through that deduplication effort. So I want to touch on a few different concepts there on how we can make sure we're getting the right level of granularity in our report results based on our requirement. The third frustration people have with reports is they will clear all of the filters from the filters panel and they will be looking for a record that they swear exists. They know it exists. They can search for it in global search. It comes right up. They have access to it. But for whatever reason, they can't get that record to show up in their report results. And the reason, especially on this third item here, for all of these frustrations people have with reports, boils down to 5 distinct things. So I want to step through each 5 of those reasons here with you now. Filters, 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 and filters. All 5 reasons are filters. Every time we're working with reports, we're working with filtering our data some way, somehow. There are 5 kinds of filters that you can toggle in the report builder. And the good news is filters 2 through 5 are editable at any point in your report building journey. If you need to tweak a time frame or a field filter, we can do advanced things like cross filters. That's all very flexible. It gives you the ability to change your mind, make a small tweak. You don't have to waste a lot of time. But the very first filter being applied to your report results is the report type. And I have it up here with an X because once you select a report type and you begin building your report, you are not able to change the report type being used on that report. So a lot of times, if you've spent hours getting your columns just right, getting your groupings, maybe you set up that report on a chart, maybe you add that chart to a dashboard, you could be investing hours of your time and later realize, oh, I need to change which report type I'm using for this report. And at that point, you have to start over and do that couple hours of work all over again using a different report type. So it leads to a lot of frustration, a lot of wasted time, and it all comes back to having an understanding of what implications there are when you select a report type for any given reporting scenario you're trying to tackle. So this is where I really wanted to, do that deep dive when I was with that first full-time admin position that I had a few years back, and wanted to understand the intricacies of how report types work and figure out if there's a more flexible way to do reporting in Salesforce. So on that deep dive, switch over to this. Oop. Okay, actually do it. You should be able to see my Salesforce screen at this point. Is that right? Okay, thank you. Let's go in here. I went to the setup menu, and first thing I learned was you can't adjust your standard report types. So anything that came out of the box with Salesforce is not an option to make a tweak. Anything that came with an installed package, you can't make a tweak. So I quickly learned that if I want to adjust my report types, I'm going to need to be working with custom report types. And I would just do an experiment and come in here and select accounts and try to figure out how this report type works when I choose accounts as the primary object. So I'll fill out this first page, go to the second page, which is where you will normally see your object relationships. I want to highlight that at this point, things are very simple and easy to understand. I've chosen accounts for the primary object. My Venn diagram shows me one completely filled in circle here. And if I were to run a report using a report type with this configuration, each of the detail rows in those results are going to show me an account record. They correspond to account records. So if I have 30 account records in my org and I run a report with this report type, I will see 30 rows of results. And it all makes sense. Now, the path that Salesforce tends to take you down, if you want to include fields from multiple objects, sort of doing multi-step reporting, is to add or relate other objects using this method here. And a couple things happen. First thing I want to point out is the list of objects you can choose in this drop-down list are all child objects for whatever object you selected in the level above. So I started with accounts, and now I'm able to choose any child object from the account object, meaning the related lists on accounts. I can work my way down my data architecture hierarchy from parent account to, say, child partner. And the Venn diagram changes. And this has a drastic effect on the results of a report run using this report type. No longer do those rows correspond to account records. Now the rows in those report results correspond to partner records that specify an account. So we have fundamentally changed what our results are going to show us. If you notice this Venn diagram, it's only the records that sort of overlap that you're going to see in those results. You're not getting all partner records. You're not getting all account records. You're only getting the partner records that specify an account. And yes, you have access to information from both of those objects for columns and field filters. Now, as we keep adding other objects here, again, we're working our way down our architecture hierarchy. This related list is going to, this drop-down list is going to show us child objects of the partner object. So I can select something like, let's do contracts. That changes our Venn diagram again. So now we're looking at a list of contract records. Each one of those contracts must specify a partner. Every one of those partners must specify an account. So we've changed the level of granularity we're getting in our report results. We've added another filter. So you see this Venn diagram gets more complicated. We're not looking at all contract records, only the ones that specify a partner, and those partners specify an account. And as we keep working our way down, we can do one more time. We can add a fourth object here, and we can choose something like opportunities. We have a super complicated Venn diagram. We've reached a limit. We can only do 4 objects in this 4-step, multi-step hierarchy. And we've added all these filters along the way. Notice that we've gotten really far away from our primary object here. We're no longer reporting on accounts. We're really just reporting on a filtered list of opportunity records that specify a contract. Every contract specifies a partner. Every partner specifies an account. One other thing I want to point out here is every piece of data in your report results must have a relationship back to your primary object. If it does not, that data gets filtered out of your results. Now, the way that manifests itself is if you have lookup relationships along this path that you're traversing. So if you have records with a lookup relationship and there's no value in that lookup field, that data, that record, that opportunity will never show up in your report results. That takes us back to that third frustration where people have cleared all the filters and they cannot get the data they want in their report results. It's because there's a filter being enforced in their report type configuration here. Now, this is a very specific scenario. It's not super flexible. We've hit this limit, and I wanted to figure out, is there a better way to do this? There has to be a better way than trying to finagle getting 4 objects in a straight line and building this super complex, super specific scenario. So I realized there is a much better way to do this. Instead of starting at the top of our data architecture hierarchy and working our way down, getting more granular and fundamentally changing what our results show us, we can start at the bottom. We can start with the object we want to report on and then bring in reference fields from parent objects, grandparent objects, great-grandparent objects, and not be enforcing filters along the way. Make everything optional, put everything in the power of the report builder in order to give you the most flexibility to solve for different use cases. So let me show you what that looks like if we take that method and we flip it upside down. So using the same example from before, but this time, let's start with opportunities as our primary object in our custom report type configuration. With a few clicks, we can bring in reference fields from any parent object, any grandparent object, great-grandparent, and we can traverse through multiple different paths, working our way up our data architecture hierarchy, traversing our lookup fields, our master detail fields, and going up to 5 levels upwards through our data architecture hierarchy. You have a ton of flexibility here, and it really opens up a lot of possibilities for having super flexible report types. I call this a deluxe report type. And the best news is there's nothing you need to install. There's nothing you need to purchase. Everything I'm going to show you today, you can do right now in any org from professional up to unlimited. All it takes is having the manage custom report types permission in order to do that. I see a question from Ruby. I will address the have or have not relationship in a little bit here. So I'll get to that. So let's go ahead and create a deluxe report type here live together to solve for a bunch of different scenarios. I'll switch back into Salesforce. So I'm going to go to the report type screen and create a brand new custom report type. For my primary object, I want to choose opportunities. Again, this is the object that should have its records represented by rows in the report results. Really want to make that connection to what records show up on the detail rows of your report results when you're choosing or you're setting up your custom report type. Now, I like to call this report type the name of the object followed by deluxe in parentheses. And this is one of many things we'll do in order to differentiate this report type from all of the other noise in our Salesforce org. The name will get filled in by itself. For the description, here. I like to say that each detail row represents an opportunity record, and then you can also include any other objects you plan to reference. So I might say includes fields from the account, campaign, and any other object you might want to include here. This description shows up on the report type selection page when people are choosing a report type to build a report. You can include any other information you feel would be helpful to them at that point so they know when they should be using this report type. So you might say something like use for all sales reports, since we're reporting on the opportunity object. In the nonprofit world, this could be used for all donation reports, since we have our donation data is stored on the opportunity object typically. This description will also help you when we need to maintain this custom report type. I'll talk a little bit about that nuance in a few steps here, but it's important to sort of keep note of what objects you're referencing to make that effort a little bit easier. For the category, I'm going to store this in the opportunities category. This list is not customizable right now. There is an idea you can upvote if you want to bring that feature to a future release. Down here in the deployment options, we want to mark our report type as deployed so that other users can see and run this report type. If you leave it as in development, only people with managed custom report types or system administrators will be able to see this report type. Now, I'm going to click next. We're going to go to the second page. This is really the hardest step, and it's because you have to resist the urge. You're going to be very tempted to start relating other objects, start complicating this Venn diagram, and working your way down your architecture hierarchy here. Resist that urge. You want to keep this Venn diagram super simple, super clean. It's the blue circle of tranquility, as I lovingly refer to it. So calm, so peaceful. And it really helps us stay focused on what our results are going to show us. So the only thing we need to do on this page is click the Save button. Now at this point, Salesforce says, congratulations, you've created your custom report type and you're done. But we are not done. And I really wish this next part was the third step in that wizard so that we could really get to the most powerful part of this. So down here at the bottom in the fields available for reports, there's this edit layout button. When we click edit layout, a lot of the power of custom report types is on this screen. I'm going to go through a couple of the features here. First thing is all of the fields from our objects that are enforced in the report type are included in the layout by default. And what I mean by the layout is these fields are going to be available to you in the report builder when you're creating a new report using this report type. So they show up over here in the all fields panel, grouped into different sections, and you can add them as columns and as field filters. Now you can scroll through this panel on the right. If you ever add a new field to any of the objects that are enforced in your report type, they will show up over here. Salesforce has also come out with a feature not too long ago where when you're creating a new field on an object, they give you this add fields to existing custom report types option. That works great to add any brand new field to any report type that enforces that object in its object relationships. So it's either it must be the primary object or you must have it enforced through multi-step, multi-level configuration. Meaning if I added a new field to the opportunity object and I left this checkbox checked, it would automatically be added to my opportunities deluxe custom report type. Now just above that panel on the right, there's this little hyperlink called add fields related via lookup. It's about size 10 font. I got to zoom in to really see what that is. Doesn't seem that important, right? This should be 100 times bigger and have fireworks because this is where you have the power to traverse your relationships, working your way up your data architecture hierarchy in order to bring in reference fields from parent objects, grandparent objects, great-grandparent objects, and even great-great-grandparent objects. You have the power to reference up to 60 unique objects 60, that is 60, and bring in up to 1,000 fields onto your custom report type layout using this method. So watch the path here as I do some of this traversing. I'm going to go up to the contract object. So I started with opportunities. I traversed that contract relationship. And at this point, I see all of the fields on the contract object. I can bring all of them into the report type layout by clicking select all. Now, because we have that 1,000 field limitation, I do like to encourage people to be a little bit picky at this point. Only choose fields that you are actively using in your implementation, fields that have data in them, and fields that would be valuable in the reporting world. Not every field that you set up needs to be available in reports. So take a second here and make sure you deselect any fields you are not using that don't bring any value to the report building world. So I know we're not using like shipping address on our contracts. I'll deselect all of that. Maybe we don't use special terms and whatever else we're not using. We're going to go ahead and get rid of some of those things. If you are picky about which fields you bring in, I guarantee you will stay well within that 1,000 field limitation. Now, once we have the fields we want to bring in, I'll click OK. They get added to the layout with this magnifying glass icon. That lets you know that this field does not live on your primary object, does not live on any other object enforced in your custom report type configuration. This is a reference field that came from using this add fields related via lookup hyperlink. If you hover over your fields, they'll tell you the lookup path that was taken to get there. Now, that can be super useful if you have multiple ways to get to the same object, and maybe you're bringing in the same fields multiple times, but via different paths. That can happen a lot with accounts, especially where you might be linking a record to multiple accounts. So if you want to know which account name we're looking at here, that lookup path is super useful to have. What I like to do is keep my report type layouts organized into at least a section for every unique object that I'm referencing. So down at the bottom, you can click Create New Section. That's going to open up a modal where you can name that section. I'll call this Accounts. You can select all of the fields by using the Shift key on your keyboard. So I would select the first one so it's highlighted blue. Hold Shift and select the last field, sort of at the bottom to the right, and then you can pick up any stragglers using the Control key on PC or Command on a Mac, and sort of multi-select a bunch of fields. Once they are all highlighted in blue, you can click and drag to drag all of those fields down to a new section. Now, why would you want to do that? It's not just for maintaining it here. These sections correspond to the folders that show up in the fields panel over here on the left. So it's a really great way to help organize your fields so people know what objects they come from, especially if you're taking multiple paths to get to the same object. Those section headers also show up as you're adding columns. So these little headers, as we scroll through, correspond to the sections that you have set up in your custom report type layout. I've had some clients who really love this, and they've spent a lot of time organizing their record page layouts into sections. So they've recreated those same sections on their report type for that object to make it super clear which information people are getting when they're building reports. Now, we can continue to use that add fields related via lookup to bring in more fields from more objects. So I'll click that again. Again, we're starting on our primary object, the opportunity. I can traverse up to that contract object that I did before, but you'll also notice I have this view related fields next to any of the relationships on that object. So if I want to know more information about the customer who signed a contract, I can click view related fields there. Now I'm looking at all the fields on the contact object. So again, I can click select all. I can remove any fields I know we're not using. And I can bring all of these contact fields into our report type layout. Again, I'm going to create another section for that to keep things super clear. I'll call this contacts. I will select all of those fields and drag them down. I'm going to do it one more time just to show how ridiculous we can get by spiderwebbing our way through our relationships in our work. So starting on opportunities, I can get more information about the contract. I can get more information about the customer who signed that contract. I can go up to the account for that contact, and I can go up to the account owner for that account. That's 5 objects in a hierarchy that you can traverse here through 4 relationships before you hit this limit. So you can go 5 objects in any straight line that you take through your data architecture hierarchy. I could select all of the fields from the user object at this point, making sure I deselect anything that we're not using. So I'll bring in all of those fields. I'll set up a new section for that. I'll call this account owners. And I will drag all of those fields down. Now we don't have to keep going up the same path. So from any of these relationships on our primary object, I could maybe start going up the campaign path. And I can get all the information I want about our primary campaign. I could traverse a campaign hierarchy if I need to. There's a ton of flexibility you have in order to reference up to 60 unique objects. So maybe I want the campaign name and I want the status and type for that campaign. I might also want some information from the parent campaign so I can traverse that relationship and at least get the ID, know if it's active or not. And maybe I want the description. Bunch of stuff here. So I'll make a new section for campaigns. Okay, so once we have a bunch of fields from all the different places we need to reference information in our opportunities report, there's a couple other handy things you should know about. If you double click on any of these fields, you'll get 2 properties that you can adjust. The first one is display as, and this works like an alias. If you're familiar with SQL queries, you can totally rename a field in your custom report types. And it doesn't affect that field's label, doesn't affect the API name. It just changes how this field displays in this custom report type. So you have a ton of flexibility here. And I want to point out, like, a field like this that's from 5 objects away, because we've traversed all the way through our hierarchy, it has a really long naming convention by default. And if you were to group your data by this field, the label will be a mile long. So it can be helpful to come in here and at the very least, shorten this up so that it looks nice when you're in the report builder. So maybe I just need to know this is the account owner and I'm checking to see if they're active or not. I've also had use cases where 2 different departments are reporting on the same data from the same field, but one of those departments is very particular about the labels they see for their column headers. Maybe they're doing some very basic export and import into another system, and they want control over those column headers. You could set up a custom report type for each of those departments, have them reporting on the same data, but one of those departments can have totally custom column headers for their data. It's a really great way to help like a fundraising team blend and start using the same data that the finance team might be looking at, even though they call it different things. Some of them call it donations, while finance might call that contributions or revenue or whatever finance word they have. So a great way to help smooth over any use cases like that. The other option you have for each field is checked by default. Now, in my opinion, that is a terrible name for this option. Salesforce should really call this default columns on new reports, because that's what this checkbox does. Any of the fields you have checked by default will show up as columns in any brand new reports you create using this report type. It's a great way to jumpstart people so they're not looking at a blank screen when they create a new report. They'll have all the columns that you specify. It has this checkmark icon next to it. So if you ever are trying to figure out why you get a certain default column in your report, you can come into that custom report type and find those. I've had people say they want to start with a blank slate every time. They're tired of clicking remove all columns. So for those people, I say go into your custom report types, find those fields that have this check mark icon, and deselect that option for all of them. And then you'll start with a blank slate. Now it's great to have these two options. It's handy to go in and adjust fields one at a time, but I wanted to do this a little bit more efficiently. And I figured out that if you highlight a bunch of fields, say an entire section, you can open up those two properties for all of those fields at the same time. Once you have everything highlighted, you can either double click or click on the Edit Properties button at the top or bottom of the screen. And that modal window will open for all of those fields. I said, okay, well, this is better. I wanted to shorten up the names of all these fields because it looks awful when I group by them. So I was going through and I was one at a time highlighting the text I wanted to delete, and it was still tedious. So I thought there must be a better way to do this. I don't want to sit here and go through 16 or 20 or 30 odd fields and do this manually. What I discovered was I needed a way to replace text on a browser page. And it turns out I'm using Google Chrome. There is such a thing as a Google Chrome extension that allows you to do exactly that. This one's called Search and Replace. I have a resources Google Doc at the end of this presentation. I'll share the link in the chat so you can go check out this Google Chrome browser extension. I also found there's a Firefox equivalent. If you're using Firefox, you can do the same thing. This search and replace is super simple. It just replaces text on a browser page. So all I needed to do was figure out how to use that with this edit screen here. So what you can do is once you selected all the fields you want to edit, click Edit Properties. That modal window is not a full-fledged browser tab, but if you right-click on the header, you have the option to say Show this modal as a tab. When you do that, you now have access to your extensions. So I'm able to come in here, select the text I want to get rid of, copy it, and then use this search and replace extension to find those 69 matches and replace them with nothing. I want to point out the settings I have here. The only one you want checked is input fields only. That is the only way I've gotten this to work.
Evan,
Yeah.
we can't see that. All we're seeing is the
Oh, yeah, that's right. Get the right share here. That's annoying. Okay. So yeah, you're seeing the new tab I have opened with all the
yeah, no
fields? Okay, perfect. Sorry about that.
worries, no worries.
So let me do that again. So I'll select all of the text I want to replace. I'll use this search and replace to find that. Here's all the 69 matches. I want to replace it with nothing. And here are the settings you need to have. Just have that input fields only checked to true. Everything else should be false. Once you do that, you can hit replace all, and it will go through and update all of those field labels in bulk for you. This has saved me so much time and helped me make all of my report type labels super consistent for an entire section of fields all at the same time. So once you're happy with the labels, then it's just a matter of choosing which fields should show up as columns by default for brand new reports. So maybe I want to bring in the username for that account owner. I want to know if they're active or not, and that's about it. So I'll click OK at that point, and the screen sharing is going to stop, and I will bring it back open with this. Okay. So there's a ton of flexibility you have here. I've walked through just a handful of what's available to you on this report type, edit report type layout screen. The last thing I want to point out is there's a default time frame filter on every report. It shows up over here in the filters panel. These are the two sort of baked in filters for every report, and one of them is a time frame filter. And if you notice, there's always a field selected by default. Turns out you have control over which field is used by default for your time frame filter. The only setting I've been able to figure out you have control over. Everything else is sort of baked in. Salesforce will choose a range. The show me filter we can't do anything about. but we do have control over the field being used for the time frame filter. The way that's controlled is quite simply whatever date or date time field shows up first in the report type layout. It just goes right in order. So this reads left to right, top to bottom. So the default time frame filter for this report type is going to be this close date field. If I wanted to use create a date instead, all I need to do is drag that field to a position higher. So maybe you put that first on your layout and then leave everything else alphabetical. Whenever I create a brand new report now, create a date will be the default field used for that time frame filter. That's just a little nuanced thing that might help if people are commonly using the wrong date field in there. You will want to click save early and often. You can literally spend hours making adjustments to this report type layout, spiderwebbing your way through your org, adding a bunch of different fields from a bunch of different places, editing all of those labels, setting up all the checkboxes for which ones should be default. So make sure you don't lose your work and click save early and often. Ruby, I do see your questions. I will be addressing both of those points. Once we have our report type saved here, I do want to show some of the possibilities that we have now. So here's our opportunities deluxe report type. I have all these fields from a bunch of different places. I've gotten even like great grandparent campaigns. All of those fields can show up as columns in my report. So I have account name, I have account industry, account type, I have contract information, I have campaign information. There's a ton of other reference data here as I'm reporting on my opportunity records. As I run this report, if there's, the whole benefit to this is that we're not applying any extra filters in our report type. I'm looking at opportunity records and I'm simply referencing data from other objects. If, for instance, there's not a contract specified, that row, that opportunity record still shows up in the results. I just don't see any data for the reference fields that it was pulling in if there is no record specified. For any that do specify, like a campaign, I can see that campaign data. So here is really the power and the benefit of using these deluxe report types is having full control over the filters being applied. The only filters being applied, for this one, it's all opportunities under the CEO. So as long as the owner has a role, you're going to see all those opportunity records. If I only wanted to see opportunities that specify a campaign, I can filter my data accordingly using this report type. I don't need to go create a bunch of different report types with a bunch of different configurations. All I need to do here is go to the filters tab and say, I want to make sure that the campaign name is not blank for all of these opportunities. And just like that, I can filter down my opportunity records. And now I will always see information in the campaign fields as far as the type, a start date, if that record has a start date. If I need to remove that, I have a different use case, different requirement. All I need to do is adjust my field filters. It's really saved me a lot of time by being able to rely on a set of custom report types. And the only decision I need to make is which records do I want to show up as the detail rows in my report? Which sort of gets to Ruby's second question here. How do you decide which primary object to select for a deluxe report type? You can set up a deluxe report type for every different object you want to report on for the detail rows. What you're deciding there is the granularity. What's going to be the rows in the results? So I've had some clients who really love this idea and they go and they build a deluxe report type for the dozen or so objects that they use in their implementation. So when they open up their choose a report type screen, they only see these deluxe report types. Now, the one they want to choose is going to depend on their reporting requirement. If they're trying to analyze their account records, they should use Accounts Deluxe. That's going to give them a list of account records. If they need more detail than that, they actually want to see all of the opportunities for that account. They're going to use Opportunities Deluxe. That'll give them, each detail row represents an opportunity record. which is why I really like having that description. It shows up right here when you're selecting your report type. If you have more, you can say, I want to read more. Show me all those details. This panel also shows you other reports created by you, reports created by others, and they tell you which objects are enforced in those object relationships. So this one is just the opportunity for this Opportunities Deluxe. The other handy thing on this screen is the Fields panel. You can quickly check to see if a field is available in the report type layout before you even begin building your report. This can save you a ton of time. So come in here and search for the fields you're hoping to report on. And if you need to make an adjustment, you can go edit your custom report type layout, come back here, and then carry on with building your report. The last thing I want to point out is on this screen, which I think is kind of a weird place to put it, but that's what Salesforce decided to do. Under this dropdown, there's one option. It's called Hide Report Type. So this is the second piece of tailoring our implementation and sort of highlighting the deluxe report types we're creating and encouraging people to use them. For all of the other noise in your Salesforce org, those standard report types, anything that you've built custom, anything that you've installed from a managed package, you can come select that report type and hide it so that you can truly encourage people to use a report type you want them to be using. So say we're not using partners, or we want to use our partners deluxe report type instead, we can hide that report type. This account teams one, we don't want that. We're going to hide that. And its contact roles also want to hide that. This is an organization-wide setting. There is no way to hide a report type or show it for a certain profile or permission set. It's sort of hidden for everybody or visible for everybody. The only other nuance you have there is people need to have read permission for an object in order to see any report types for that object. So the only other way to sort of make that nuanced for different departments is by controlling their read permissions to that object. Now, if we go in the categories panel down here, the very bottom is a category for hidden report types. I get the question at this point, how do I bring back a report type that I've hidden? So if you come in here to your hidden report types, you can go find anything that you've hidden and bring it back to life. In fact, I accidentally hid my deluxe report type. So I can go ahead and show that. And it tells you now that it's unhidden, visible for everybody across the entire org. Okay. Now, I had a question about what happens when we choose the have or have not relationship on the primary object. So let me talk about that real quick. A lot of what I showed up until this point was doing the every A record must have a B record to get that inner join in our report type configuration. Let's talk about the may or may not have option here. Tends to throw people for a loop, or there's a lot of misconceptions about what you're getting in these report results. The Venn diagram actually tells us exactly what we're going to get in this. So I've started with opportunities as the primary object. I've chosen payments as the secondary object here. And then I did the may or may not have option to say A records may or may not have B records. What you're getting is that same inner join that we have from before. Notice if I toggle back to here, that inner join is highlighted, same thing here. We are still getting a result for every payment that specifies an opportunity. Still true. In addition to that, we're also going to get all of the opportunity records, all the records from object A that don't have any records in object B. Essentially, in this case, opportunities that don't have any payments will be added in to our report results. I've talked to Salesforce engineers about this. What they end up doing is they run two separate queries on their servers and they slap all the results together and put them on the screen for you. It's truly two different result sets that you're seeing all put together at the same time. Now, the tricky thing that starts to happen with those is you are able to filter on those two data sets independently, which is a good thing. It's actually what we want to happen in this scenario. And it's really useful for situations in the nonprofit world where a finance team asks you, I want to see the summary of payments made against all of our major gifts for a certain time frame. Maybe they want to see all payments as of the end of last month. So what you're going to want to include in your results are payment records, but if they also want to see those major gifts that haven't had any payments made at all, or maybe they don't have any payments made in that time frame, you still want to include that opportunity record. You just want to show a 0 for the payments that came in during that time frame. This with or without style reporting really helps in those situations where you're trying to figure out how to show a record with a 0 for the summary next to it. Let me show you what that looks like in a report here. I have this big deal report. I have this big deal opportunity, and I also have this 1,000 units opportunity. This is that opportunities with or without payments report type. So I'm getting a result for every payment record that specifies an opportunity. You'll see that here with all these payment names. But I also see a result for opportunity records that don't specify or that don't have any child payments. So that's why I'm also getting this 1,000 units opportunity here. And what you can do is notice my payment dates. I have the 25th of every month from November through March today, March 25th. But let's say the finance team just wants to see payments that came in the previous calendar year. I can filter down my data to say only show me payment dates equal to last year. I like to use these relative date filters. If you're not familiar with that, I'll put a link in the chat in a moment. They really help you keep your reports super dynamic so you don't have to rebuild on January 1st all of your reports or change the filters. If you just set it up like this and call it like, finance report to look at payments from last year, it will always be reflecting the time frame they're interested in, looking 1 year back. Those relative date filters really go a long way. But notice what happens to our results here. So I've filtered down the data. It has taken out the payments that were for this year, but it's leaving in that 1,000 units opportunity because it doesn't have any payments with which to filter on. So the only way to get data from your A object to be filtered out in a report type using this with or without option is if you apply a filter from a field on that object. So if I were to, let's even do opportunity name is not equal to 1,000 units. Because I'm applying a field filter on the opportunity object, I'm able to remove that opportunity from the results. So as long as you understand that the fields filters you are applying here work independently across those two objects, you'll be able to tailor your results to get exactly the data you need for something like this payment as of a certain date report requirement. Ruby, does that answer both of your questions?
Yeah. You totally clarified the differences between those two. So thank
Awesome.
you.
Absolutely. So at this point, we've dissected report types. We've built a deluxe report type. We've taken a look at some complicated scenarios like what I just showed here. The last thing I'll touch on that I highlighted a little bit earlier was cross filters. This is a way to filter your data based on records from a child object, whether they exist or not. So there's a lot of different options here. What cross filters help you do is tackle that situation where you have duplicate results in your report. Let me hop over to an example of that. If you're working with your opportunity data and you have this opportunities deluxe report and you run it, you might notice that the same account name shows up multiple times. And that's where people say, hey, there's duplicates. I need to export this to Excel. I only want to see Express Logistics and Transport one time. I only want to see University of Arizona one time. If you really dig into that report requirement, one of two things could be happening. Either they want a summary of opportunity data for every account, and you just need to group this differently and sort of hide the details. That would look something like this. We'll group by the account name, and we'll hide the details. That's one option to help deduplicate the results. Alternatively, sometimes the requirement might be they want their detail rows to be account records, right? So the way we do that is by making sure we're using the right deluxe report type for the job. Instead of reporting on our opportunity data, maybe we just want to report on our account data. And then people get into the thing where they're like, well, I want to see a list of accounts, but I want to make sure they have an opportunity that meets certain criteria. That's where cross filters can help you do that complex filtering. So the thing to remember is when you're starting and you're building your report type or you're choosing a report type for your report, really focus in on what you want the detail rows to be. So if you know, I want the detail rows to be account so that I can show multiple columns from the account records, I just need a complex filter. Go ahead and choose accounts deluxe because that's what you want the rows to be. And then you can do things like add a cross filter. This will let you start with any object you've enforced in your object relationships. Generally, for our deluxe report types, you're only going to have one option there because we've only selected one object. But we can say, only show me accounts with opportunities that meet certain criteria. So we'll start this by saying, show me accounts that have opportunities. And this does apply a filter at this point. So essentially, we've filtered out all of the accounts that don't have any opportunities. Okay, that's what we've done so far. Now we can add additional criteria to our cross filter. So we can say, only show me accounts that have opportunities that meet this additional criteria. Maybe you want to make sure the amount is over $1,000, greater or equal to 1,000. So in this sense, we're able to filter down a list of account records based on them having opportunities that meet certain criteria. It's a really handy way to tackle some of those more complex situations. Now, I'll point out that your cross filter just allows you to filter your data from fields on your child object. I cannot show opportunity fields as columns in this accounts deluxe report type. Just wanted to make that super clear. If you do need to show opportunity fields, then you probably want to use your opportunities deluxe report type to do that. But keep in mind, we have these other options to help us do some complex filtering, and it will allow us to eliminate the duplicates from our results. So we're getting exactly what we want to see, and we don't have to export to Excel and do that manual step of deduplicating the data. So really handy way to use some standard features like cross filters to narrow down our account data as needed. Last thing I'll touch on is once we've gotten a handle on what deluxe report types can do, we've built them out for all of the objects we hope to report on. We've hidden all the report types that we don't want people to use to really help make that experience a little bit better. The last thing you might want to do is start to analyze your existing reports. Turns out you can build a deluxe report type on the report object so that you can report on your reports. And in fact, it's the only way to report on the report type being used in each of your reports is to build a deluxe report type on the reports object. So let's show you what that looks like. We'll start a new report with our reports deluxe custom report type. I have the report name, I have the report type, I can add a column for the folder that report is stored in, and super useful thing here is the last run date. So it can really help you prioritize reports that are used every day that you might want to take a look at which report type they're being used, maybe rebuild it if you need to. It'll also help you see reports that have never been run. Maybe you can delete those or move them to a folder that is not shared with anybody. Let's go ahead and run this report on our reports to find what are the reports that were run the longest ago. So these are from 2018. Doesn't look like anybody's using that, but we can turn this around and say which reports have been run most recently. So you can easily find those reports that your organization is using on a daily basis. But taking all this together, I know I've thrown a lot at you. I do have some resources that I will put in the chat here, but I do want to open it up for questions at this point. How do you think this will help? What other questions do you have? I'm here to be a resource for you. I will put my contact information if you think of something later. But thank you so much for being here today, and I hope you've learned something valuable and that you can walk away and start using in your implementations.
Wow, Evan, that, um, that's like mind-boggling. I was just curious as how did you figure this out? Like, what was your process for kind of like reverse engineering this whole custom report type thing?
Yeah, it was out of necessity. So I had those users coming to me saying they need to solve these problems. They need this data. How can we do it? And it was a lot of banging my head against the wall. It was a lot of searching across the internet, trying to find reporting resources. And then I just started, it wasn't as clean at the beginning. I was sort of using the deluxe technique, but didn't quite have the naming convention down. So I was starting to just bring in those reference fields. There's a lot of playing with things, but over time, I've been able to sort of synthesize and reflect on what I was doing and really boil it down to its most basic components. And that's really helped clarify it for me. It's also helped that I give this presentation a lot. So the repetition has helped me refine that as I'm teaching people and showing them these concepts.
That's really cool. I did have a specific question, actually use case of a nonprofit client that I'm working with that has a managed package from a third party vendor for
Hmm.
their volunteers.
Okay.
And now you mentioned something that I think at the beginning you mentioned something about you can't touch any of the standard reports and you can't touch any of the managed
Right.
package reports.
Right.
So but you able to actually do like let's say that you did a deluxe report on volunteers, for example, you would be able to see the managed package. You'd be able to pull in the fields from the managed package report into your custom?
Absolutely. Yeah. So as long as you're building your own custom report type, you can traverse data models regardless if they're managed packages, installed objects, or your own custom objects or standard objects. They're all available to you once you're building your own uh, custom report type in your own namespace.
Okay. Okay. And then that trick that you had about the find and replace
Yeah,
list, is that in your document where you
it
show it
is. Yep.
prominent?
So that
Oh,
one is point number 3. So I have the Google Chrome extension there, and then there's the Mozilla version in there too.
okay, cool. Does anybody have any questions? Do you find this, how would you use this in your own domains that you're working with, or any use cases that you can see being able to use this technique?
Evan, I just wanted to say thank you. I'm I'm the Salesforce admin for an org that has some fairly complicated reporting requirements, and I've used the lookup fields before, but kind of flipping this whole idea on its head really makes me consider redoing all of my reports. um, and I definitely learned a couple of things today, so thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for being here.
And with some of the latest updates, do you see anything on the horizon that you think is going to make it easier in terms of pulling down our data into these reports?
So a lot of I'll start with some of the recent things they've done have made it much more usable in Lightning. That report type selection screen got an overhaul a few releases ago to bring in all those details for that panel on the right. That's been huge.
Yeah.
Um, but Salesforce has been looking at like brand new features. So you can do things like inline editing. I think
Mm,
some organizations have really taken to that. And I've heard about some clients who some of their people don't even look at record detail pages anymore. They just run reports and use inline editing to update data in their instance. So it's really making the report engine sort of the interface that people are using now that you can edit data there. And I think if you couple a brand new feature like that with a very clear understanding of the underlying report type, it can really open up for some amazing possibilities to get all the information people need on one screen and allow them to make edits very quickly.
Wow.
So yeah, it's all about, building that synergy and making sure you have full alignment from the core foundation of your report, which is that report type. And then you're able to layer on these brand new features like inline editing to really take it over the top. Uh,
Wow.
one of the things on the horizon that I've heard that they're working on is uh, redoing the report type configuration wizard. I sort of talked about that, how I wish there was that third step. I say that every time, and I know they see recordings of this presentation, because I'm really hoping I can be part of that conversation to get that baked into the report type configuration wizard. So I know that's something they're thinking of, and hopefully we'll see other new innovative things come out of that effort as well. And one of the sort of future state things that I think they have toyed around the idea of sort of eliminating the separate configuration of a report type altogether, which I
Mm,
think would be huge. It's doing the same thing that I'm sort of educating people on here is, starting with something super basic and then being able to expand upon it. But
mm.
if they sort of eliminated the report type altogether and you just chose which object you want to pull data from in the report builder, I think that could be a really cool way to keep things super flexible as well. I don't know
Wow.
any other details about that other than the rumor that they have considered that as a potential future enhancement.
Wow. Yeah, that would be pretty huge.
Yeah,
I remember when I was working early on with Crystal Reports, I think that was one of the things that you were able to do. You weren't, you could just select tables that you wanted to pull data from and
right.
bingo, like everything was there instead of having all these
Different report
segments
types.
of data.
Right.
Yeah, that's super cool. Now, you're probably aware that they're coming out with this new nonprofit cloud product.
Yes. Mhm.
Do you see anything in regards to reports in that new iteration of the nonprofit? And I guess it's an iteration off of NPSP. I'm not totally clear yet about where they're going with that, but
Right.
me
Yeah, I
think
think for that new product, a lot of these concepts will still apply. So you can still build your deluxe report type for every different object you're using in that architecture as well. I haven't gotten my hands on that yet, so I don't know too many nuanced details about that, but I'm pretty sure that all the same reporting features you have today, you'll be able to continue to use on that new nonprofit cloud offering.
okay, cool. All right, any other questions?
I sort of have a related question, not specifically for this, but what is the new nonprofit cloud? Because every year or two, they always change names, but you know,
Yes. So the short history is NPSP is sort of managed as a package that you install into your Salesforce org, and it gives you some custom objects, custom functionality. Salesforce and Salesforce.org were two separate entities for a long time, and a few years ago, Salesforce.com sort of reabsorbed Salesforce.org, so they're one company again. And I think that was in an effort for this latest announcement, which is instead of maintaining a separate package of NPSP that's sort of specific to nonprofits, they want to bring that same functionality to the core platform and use it across all industries. So they're rebuilding functionality for nonprofits on what they're calling the nonprofit cloud, and you won't need an installed package at all. It won't get updated in a separate sequence, separate timeline. It'll be part of the core offering that Salesforce is allowing people to use. And the huge benefit for them is they can take a piece of functionality and sort of build it for all industries, nonprofit or health cloud or government or sales cloud or really anything. And they can make it available to everybody. But for the nonprofits who are looking for that nonprofit specific functionality, they'll still have access to that and it'll be part of this like core Salesforce platform.
okay.
It's very new. They just announced it last week. There
Oh,
is a version of it that you can get, but it only handles like program management and something else. They don't even have like donation management in the new nonprofit cloud yet. I think it'll be a number of releases before that starts to be enticing for a lot of the common use cases that nonprofits have. It's something I would keep your eye on, maybe a year from now, sort of revisit see where they're at, see if it makes sense for your org, and you can make a decision at that point.
Yeah, and actually in May, I've got a speaker, Banu, who is going to, I guess he's been a big part of testing this nonprofit cloud. So if you folks are interested in May, he'll be our guest speaker and he'll be talking to us about this latest update. So yeah, it's right now the word on the street is they're not encouraging nonprofits to leave their NPSP product, and hopefully I'm hoping that they're going to maintain it for quite a while this transition is happening. So
Yeah.
we'll see how it goes. The other thing I wanted to mention is if you are interested in joining our LinkedIn group for the Honolulu user group, that's where I'm going to be posting the replay of this particular, actually I posted replays of all of our sessions. There's so much information here, so I highly encourage you join our group so that you can watch the replay and then take it step by step. I know I'm going to be watching this frequently just to kind of get a muscle memory of how to do deluxe report types. There's a lot going on in there. And I'm gonna, oh, well, we're at 11:15. Are there any other questions before we sign off? Okay, well, thank you, Evan, so much for spending your Saturday with us. This is amazing information. You've really made our lives a lot easier. So thank you so much for contributing to our ecosystem with your wisdom and your hard work to figure this stuff out for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me again. It was great to be here.
Great. And hopefully maybe next time you can come to Honolulu.
I would love to. I would love to have that excuse. Yes. Let me know.
All right. All right. Aloha, everyone, and we'll see you next month.
Bye.